Good afternoon and welcome to Orchids 201, a webinar about orchids and beyond Phalaenopsis is what we call it. My name is Mark Robbins. I'm the Director of Development for the College of Sciences and Humanities at Ball State. And with me are Cheryl LeBlanc and Russ Vernon. They also did Orchids 101. Today we're going to be talking about something beyond just learning how to grow your initial plant. So like I said, we entitled it Beyond Phalaenopsis. So we're going to be talking about different lighting issues, pests and diseases, as well as a number of other topics. We also got some different presentations and how-tos in terms of some things that you'll find very interesting in terms of sterilizing and also some other important topics. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Russ and Cheryl. Just like in Orchids 101, if you would like to chat your questions in at any time, I'll be interrupting them and presenting those questions so that you can be sure to get some good interactive feedback on things that might be troubling or of question to you. So at this point, Russ and Cheryl.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
We'd like to welcome you to webinar today and remind you a little bit about why we're here. Phalaenopsis is a beautiful orchid. It's only one of about 30,000 different kinds that are found worldwide. The diversity of the orchid family is pretty unique, and we'd really like to share it with you today. There are about 100,000 different hybrids, if you might recall from our Orchids 101 webinar, and we've got some of both hybrids and species for you to see today. As we refer to Phalaenopsis, we're mostly referring to the type that's right up here in the screen. Those are the most commonly grown. Everybody likes to have them. They're easy to grow. But if you have grown them and would like to graduate on to the next step, we'd like to take you today. So you have at least a few orchid plants, and you'd like to grow them better, or you'd like to keep them healthy, and you'd like to know how to make them thrive and possibly even grow different varieties. That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. We'll mention how to keep your plants healthy, some choices that you might like to try if you want to expand your collection, and how to share your collection with friends, family, and at the final part of the program, we'll talk to you about bringing them possibly to shows and other ways to share them. We'll give a demonstration on how to divide a plant. If you get to that place in your collection where your plants are thriving and it's gotten to be a very large plant, you're going to want to know how to make parts and pieces of it and share it with your friends. So the first thing we need to talk to you about today is orchid parts. When we go to dividing a plant, you need to know a little bit about what it's composed of. The Phalaenopsis that we talked about last time is in a group of plants called monopodal or 1 foot. As you might be able to see, the plant has one central stalk, and the leaves all emerge from that place. There are other kinds of orchids called sympodal, or many feet, this one. They have many, many branches, and they're all connected, in the slide, with a rhizome. That's basically the little part of the plant that runs from one stem to the other. The stem can be referred to as a cane or a pseudo-bulb, pseudo meaning fake bulb, and they actually have a food and water storage function. So they're very critical to keeping your plant healthy. Most commonly, you'll see the plants have growth from one end of the stem, we can refer to on the slide, from one end of the rhizome to another, and the new growth will come out in the leading edge of the plant. As you can see from the slide, the portion where the new growth comes is called the eye, and that's where you'll pay attention when you're dividing your plant. We'll need to make sure each piece has an eye or a dormant eye. Those are critical parts to pay attention. The other thing about an orchid that you need to pay attention to is the root growth. The big white fleshy parts that you see in the slide, that's a cell structure called velamen. It's actually a spongy layer that does a lot of the food and water absorption. And the new lush green tips on the end are the active growth. So all those parts and pieces are critical to having a healthy plant, and paying attention to those parts, divide it, is important. Next thing we'd like to talk to you about is how to keep your plants healthy. Basically, good culture is the first and foremost way to keeping your plant happy. You need to include a proper watering regime and make sure you feed it, and then provide the right environment, the right temperature and the right humidity are both critical to keeping your plant happy. Depending on what kind of plant you have, those conditions may differ. As we mentioned earlier, they come from all over the world, so plants that grow in the cloud forest region are going to be a little different in their climate control needs than something that grows near the soil. Grooming. Grooming is a big part of keeping your plants healthy. It actually reduces the chances of disease and bacteria. If you remove the dead leaves as they come off, where disease can be harbored is a little critical when you're talking about dead leaves. Repotting, the demonstration we did last time actually showed you how to repot a typical orchid, the Phalaenopsis. When the media that your plant is growing in starts to decompose, you can encourage root rot and some other diseases. Keeping your plants healthy involves making sure they're growing in a good, healthy media. The next part, we'll show you some specific slides on insects, bacteria, and virus. And those are things that you can come across more often as your collection gets a little bit bigger. You need to more or less be vigilant against these all the time. So insect pests include many that are listed here, and I'll show you separate slides for each one. They are wide and varied in their scope. They are basically everywhere. The more plants you have, the more chances you have to find any and all of these types. So let's start with mealybugs. These are a sap-sucking insect. They actually don't look much like an insect at all. They don't have 6 legs. Some of them have long tails, and they are actually farmed by ants. They will suck the sap or the liquid part of the plant, produce a sticky exudate at the back end of these insects. That's what the ants like. They are not mobile when they're fully adult, but they make a thick cottony mass. Look for those. That's where the eggs are laid. Boudival scale is one kind of another sap-sucking insect, and this is a sort of a nemesis in greenhouse collections. So actually watch for this as you buy your plants, because it's easy for that to get transferred from one collection to another, not even being aware of it. They tend to like to hide out on the stems and in the new growth. These are mobile only when they're young. The adults actually are stationary, but they can lead to the demise of your plant. Look closely under the leaves and in the new growth areas for the. This is another kind of scale. This is called brown scale or soft brown scale. There are many different types, and they're prevalent under the leaves primarily. Both the scales and the mealybugs can be controlled with different chemicals or other ways, but basically vigilance is how to keep those in check. Aphids and ants are another problem. They're not as abundant in a lot of greenhouse situations, but they do exist. These can be controlled with basically rose products, some orthene and ants will obviously farm the aphids. They're after that sticky substance that the aphids produce. So if you find one, you'll likely find the other. Thrips are a tiny little insect, about 1 millimeter long. They have feathery, plumy-like wings that we never actually get to see. But they're sucking insects, and they actually puncture the plant with their mouth parts, and that causes the damage that you see on these flowers. They're hard to get rid of. You actually see the damage caused by them before you see these. Spider mites are another greenhouse problem, and they're actually an agricultural pest as well. You'll notice these, again, first by the symptoms rather than by the insect itself. The leaves have a little spotty looking texture to them, and if it gets really bad, you'll see this cottony web underneath the leaf surface. They're very, very tiny. Snails and slugs are another problem. If you do have that growing condition where you provide the high humidity that the orchids really need, then the chances are of finding snails and slugs are greater. They thrive in environments like that. Various treatments for slug control includes over-the-counter sort of pelletized products, and you could slug bait, and you can use. People have used beer as a bait for them.
Good excuse here in your growing area, I've found.
Can't do that at a university, though.
No, that's true.
We've provided one recipe for an insecticide here that you may choose to use, and we'll have this available as a reference to you. It's a combination of things that you can mostly find available locally in your garden stores and even in your grocery stores. The Physan is an antifungal that you may have to special order or get from an agricultural supply. This recipe makes 1 gallon. The other part of being vigilant with your plants is basically monitoring any potential problems that you have and taking care of them before they get out of control. It's a good way to do that. Russ is going to talk to us about bacterial and fungal problems next.
Right, and I also wanted to add on the insect part too. If you grow your orchids outside, you want to remember that you may be bringing insects that were outside in the house with you. So you want to treat your plants before you bring them inside, and do a couple treatments before you bring them inside, because usually you end up killing the adults, and then you have the eggs, and then they'll hatch out. So if you do a couple treatments, maybe 3 or 5 days apart, you'll tend to get the late hatching ones and not have a problem in your house. Okay, bacterial problems and fungal problems. The nice thing about this situation is that if you grow your plants well, you're probably not going to have much exposure to this problem. So if the plant is healthy, if the growing environment is close to ideal for them, then you're much less likely to have a bacterial or fungal problem. The difference between the two is that fungi spread by airborne spores, and bacteria are spread by splashing water. So if you see something like the picture in the lower left, that's a bacterial problem, and it usually looks kind of watery on the leaf. And you want to isolate the plant so that you don't splash water from that plant to another. The fungal problem, the way you avoid spreading that is also isolation, but you also want to make sure that the affected plant is not above or upwind from your other plants. So if you have air ventilation going on, you want to make sure that it's away from the other plants, and not the draft from the fan or whatever is not potentially carrying spores. So the flower problem you see there, that's a tritis fungal spotting, and that usually occurs when you have high humidity and a little bit of coolness in temperature. The bicultural conditions, and one way to avoid it is, and this is really hard for orchid enthusiasts, is don't crowd your plants. You want to get as many plants in your growing space as possible, and I can understand that. I'm guilty of that myself. But whenever leaves overlap, that usually creates a high humidity situation between the leaves, because remember, those leaves are giving off moisture. And that builds up, and the spores of both fungi and bacteria are always on the leaves of your plants. So when the conditions are just right, they'll germinate and start to grow, and then they can leave the black spots that you see. Or in the case of bacteria, they'll go up in the little stoma. There's a little open space on the underside of the leaf, and they grow in there, and then they start killing the cells between the two layers of the leaf, the upper and lower layers. So by having good air circulation and not having them too crowded, you can avoid that. And then as far as root problems go, usually you have bacterial and fungal problems, rot problems with roots. And that's usually caused by watering too often, which a lot of us make a mistake when we start growing early on. Also, by waiting too long to repot your plant. If the potting material begins to decompose, it holds more moisture. Even though you're watering at the same frequency, it'll be more moist in the pot and cause possible root rot. So you want to avoid that. So let's see. On the slide, you can see there's some cures and preventatives that you can. If you make a cut, you can use cinnamon to coat the cut, and that'll act as both an antibacterial, antifungal agent. If you have that wet, watery spot on the leaf I was talking about, you can take a sterile razor blade and play tic-tac-toe on the affected area and sprinkle cinnamon on there or the hydrogen peroxide, and that'll dry up the bacterial problem. And if you do have rot problems in the crown of a Phalaenopsis plant, the hydrogen peroxide will work on that. Physan actually is a product that you can use that does both bacteria and fungi, and it's systemic. It has copper in it, so you have to make sure that your water is not very acidic. So if 7.0 is neutral, you don't want it to be any more acidic than 6.5, because what happens in an acidic situation is the copper gets released, and you can eventually get copper toxicity on the plants, which will kill the plants. The Physan or Consan is a sprayable material that is good for preventing bacterial and fungal problems, particularly fungal. And then again, the rose products are good for those things. And they can contain products like Captan or Funginex, which are listed for roses, but also can be used on other ornamentals, including orchids. If you have virus, these are some leaf symptoms and flower symptoms of virus. You can have ring spot virus, which you can see on the leaf sample on the left. You can have tobacco mosaic or tomato mosaic virus, which shows up on the leaf samples on the lower picture on the slide. So these are things to look for. And then the flower, if you look closely, you can see that there's some irregular coloring in the pigment on the flower, and that indicates color break virus, which I believe is a Cymbidium tobacco complex virus. And if you have this situation, obviously if you're buying a plant, don't buy a plant like this. But if you have this situation in the plants you have, fortunately the best thing to do is to throw the plant out, because they're very easy to transmit. Insects can transmit them, particularly aphids and some of the scales. And if you don't sterilize your cutting tools properly, you can transfer them yourself by cutting on an infected plant and then cutting on a healthy plant. So that's a very important thing to avoid if at all possible, because it is easy to spread.
For bacteria and fungal infections, you can't get rid of it.
Right. Once you have it, you have it. It's with the plant forever. Okay, Cheryl's going to talk about some different choices that we talked about besides Phalaenopsis. Cheryl?
One of the things that we'd like to recommend when you're looking to expand your collection is to fit your growing conditions. Choose your plant to fit your existing growing conditions rather than the other way around. It's really hard to resist finding a plant that's beautiful, that grows in a really high humidity environment if you don't have that environment at home. The choices are to retrofit your home or buy a different kind of plant. So what we'd like to talk to you next about is some of the different kinds that we'd like to recommend if you're going to expand beyond the starter group of Phalaenopsis, some of the lady slippers we talked about last time. Paphlopediums are the lady slippers from Asia, and Phragmipediums are the lady slippers from South America. Both of them need growing conditions that are similar to the moth orchids, with the exception of the Phalaenopsis, or the Papilopediums, which need the lime. So that makes them a little bit different than the frags. The other group that we'd like to encourage you to try is the Cattleya group. These are really the showy corsage orchids that everybody knows. These are the things that you might have gotten for a Mother's Day gift or for a prom, and you'd wear them as a corsage. They come in large and small, and there are so many different kinds and colors that you can't go wrong with choosing something. There's mini Cattleyas. The whole group is pretty well known as a bright light group. They need more watering when they're in active growth, and in the winter when they slow down for their growing, their watering needs decrease. So base a lot of your reference points off of Cattleya needs, and then we'll move forward from there. Dendrobiums are another group of orchids. This is one type that is a small one. There are about 1,200 different kinds of dendrobiums. They tend to be Asian and New Guinea and Australian in their origin, and many, many different types. On this slide in the upper right, you can see the Phalaenopsis type. They actually look more like the moth orchids, and therefore they have that kind of name. In the lower left, you'll see the type that are called antelope dendrobiums, and they have a good name. They have the long spurs that actually give them that fun common name. And then to the far right, you'll see a group called the nobili or noble type. These guys actually need a cool, dry rest in the winter. And if you water them in the winter, you'll seriously affect their health. You can water them some, but don't water them as if you were watering them in the winter or in the summer. Often you'll see them lose their leaves, and don't panic, because this is when they're actually going dormant or slowing down in their growth. And when they begin to grow again in the springtime, for us in our hemisphere, that's when they begin to put out their flowers. So if you have long canes or stems that don't have any leaves, don't cut them off. That's where the flowers come from. The other group is Odontoglossums and Oncidiums. These are quite beautiful and widely varied in their colors and shapes. They are grown like Cattleyas, again, with that bright light condition. Oncidiums are referred to as the dancing dolls, mostly in reference to that large, showy skirt or lip that they have. And Odontoglossums are cooler growers. They need a cooler evening. Cymbidiums, we didn't bring examples of these plants today, but they are typically grown outside in the summer and brought back inside for the winter. And again, as Russ referred to, taking notes about your possible re-entry of outdoor insects, these are one of the examples where that can come into play. These are semi-terrestrials, and they're from the Far East in their natural habitats. They prefer cooler nights in the winter, and in order to get them to bloom, it's highly recommended that you skip the fertilizer from September through the spring. Most of them are known as large plants, but there are some miniatures out there, so you can. Some of the things we'd like to recommend when you're looking for a healthy plant, if you're going to expand your collection and go out and actually buy some, look seriously for plants that have firm leaves, not limpy or furrowed leaves. Want the stems or the canes to be plump and not furrowed, so that you'll know that they're actually getting enough moisture. The new growth should be active and healthy and not covered with a lot of the black tips and spots that we showed as the bacterial problems. And the other thing you're looking for is healthy roots. A healthy root typically has the nice white edges on the outside and the active growing tip to indicate that they're actually growing. If you don't have the active growing tip, often that will be an indication that there has been damage to it, or there's been mineral deposits or insect damage. those things are some things that you would like to try to avoid. So Russ is going to talk to us more about what else to avoid when you're expanding your collection.
Cheryl, when you're looking at the leaves, that bacteria and fungal business I was talking about earlier will cause black spots or watery spots, and sometimes you'll see a watery spot around a black spot, and that means that the fungus or bacteria is active. You definitely want to avoid that. There are some plants, and one of the more famous ones is Oncidium sherry baby, which smells like chocolate, are more prone to getting these black spots. And that happens usually in the early spring or the late fall when temperatures start to drop a bit, the humidity goes up, the heat doesn't come on frequently yet to dry air out. You get little condensation spots on the leaves. Bacteria grows under those spots, kill a few cells, spots evaporate and go away, and then the bacteria dies and it leaves those dead cells behind as black spots. They aren't active, but they make the plant a little less attractive. And some plants are just more prone to get that. Sunburn is another thing that you can possibly see on plants, and possibly your own, especially if you take them outside in the summer. They've been in the kind of lower light conditions in your home, and you take them outside and maybe put them in a little brighter spot than they're used to, and you can get some sunburn, especially on the surface of the leaf that's perpendicular to the sun coming in. And that'll be yellow, and if you're considering buying a plant that has some sunburn damage, again, make sure the margins of that damaged area are not watery, so secondary bacteria hasn't gotten in there and started to cause a problem. Sunken streaks or spots, this is something that occurs quite often and is really hard to figure out the cause with Phalaenopsis, because bacteria, fungi, virus, cold water, they can all cause sunken areas in the leaves. And it's a problem to look out for, and it's hard to know if it's a physiological thing like the cold water, or if it's a pest problem like fungi, bacteria, or virus. So avoid those. Bacteria, again, we talked about the watery leaves. Look on the underside of the leaves, too, to make sure that there aren't watery spots there, because that's usually where a bacterial problem will start. The virus, you want to avoid the streaking, again, in the leaves, like we said with the Phalaenopsis, but the Cymbidium leaves will show that. Cattleya leaves can also show that. And you definitely want to avoid the virus. If you have any suspect of virus being a possibility, why avoid that like the plague. Spider mites, those are insects that are very hard to see, and you can look. Usually they're on the underside of the leaves. They're usually active under low humidity and high temperature situations. And a lot of times you'll see little silvery patches on the surface of the leaf. And if you look real closely, you might see little tiny spider webs. And the way to check for sure is to take a white sheet of typing paper, hold it under the leaf, tap the leaf, and if you get little specks running around on the paper, you know you have active spider mites. Scale insects, you've seen the slides of those. They're pretty easy to pick out unless they're underneath the sheathing that protects the new growth. As the new growth, particularly in cattleyas, expands, this green sheathing will eventually turn brown and kind of papery, and the scales hide underneath there, especially the Bois de Val scale. And so if you're suspicious, you peel that back a little bit and just look underneath and see if there's any little white specks there. On the main leaf itself, if you see on the upper surface a yellow discolored area, kind of irregular shape, turn the leaf over, and if it has that scale, it'll be a cluster of little white patches underneath, starting to degrade the leaf. They can also grow down on the new growth and in the cracks and crevices, so you need to do a pretty good inspection just to make sure. Brown leaf tips. Those usually indicate a physiological problem. The plant hasn't been watered often enough, it's been watered too much, it's been given too much fertilizer, and that's burned the roots. It usually indicates some problem with the root system. So while you're in the store, you can't pull it out of the pot and look at the roots. But just be aware of that. If you couple it with shriveled leaves or the stems, the pseudobulbs, then that's probably a matter of watering. Yes?
Problems to all parts of the country? Are they more indicative of certain geographical regions, or are they more pervasive?
That's a good question. I would say the bacterial and fungal problems may tend to be a little further north where they get cooler temperatures. Spider mites and scale may be a little further south. And of course, if you're in the Midwest like we are, we're on the margin of both, so you can get both. Oh, aren't we lucky? But at any rate, yeah, I would make that generality. If you grow your plants outside, the soft brown scale and Bois Duval scale grow on like euonymus bushes in your yard, and they can easily transfer. The mites can grow on, oftentimes on tree leaves, and in the fall they're looking for a warm place, so they'll drop on your plants. But I think probably most of these are common throughout the country, so you need to be vigilant wherever you're getting your plants from. Okay, let's see. Next up, what to avoid. And we'll go through this fairly quickly because we've discussed a lot of it in what we've talked about before. Plants not firmly anchored in the pot, as you can see in that slide. A lot of aerial roots. If you have a lot of excessive aerial roots, it might be that the potting media has broken down, and so those roots are rotted, and the plant is generating aerial roots to compensate. Spots or pitting in the roots, that might mean there's slugs or snails active in the potting material. Streaked or blotched flowers, maybe botched. That's, like we said, a good sign of virus, so you want to avoid that for sure. Pepper spots, that's the botrytis on flowers, and it's fungal in origin on foliage. White waxy masses, that's scale or mealybug, and usually the mealybug can be pretty sneaky. It'll hide underneath the lip of the flower, or it'll be between the sepals and the petals, hiding in between the sepals and petals. So carefully use your pinky and fold the petal back and look at the space between. The flower margins, if they're dusty and they're brown, that is a good indication of thrips. You want to keep in mind that some of these situations you can overlook and take a chance, like the black spotting on the leaves on the cherry baby, because it's not active. You know, check to make sure spotting is not an active. by American Orchid Society website. They'll have a listing of all societies. And the American Orchid Society is also a source for where your orchid shows are, so that you can go to orchid shows, and your local society may put on a show or put on in displays at other shows. So you can share your plants that way by including them in the society's display. Okay, little technical problem here. Let's see, learning to prepare your plants for the show. Yeah, that's where the eating out came out. Okay. You want to make sure your plants are staked properly, and you want to do it early on, just as the buds are beginning to show, because the buds orient towards light, and they're also oriented by gravity and the direction from which the light comes. So if you stake it early and then don't move the plant, because if you change the orientation of the plant to the light, it'll change the orientation of the buds to the light. So leave it one place, you'll get a nice display of flowers. You want to make sure the leaves are clean, and any bad-looking leaves that aren't essential for the survival of the plant, remove those. And again, you can take them to orchid shows. You can also take them to judgings. The American Orchid Society has judgings once a month at various places around the country. And then you can see by the slide kind of in the middle at the bottom of an orchid plant that's well packed in a box. You want to be sure that they don't move around, and kind of shake the box a little bit and see if the flowers are rubbing up against other plants or leaves of your plant. And you want to try and stake them or orient them so that doesn't happen. And a good way to prevent damage, too, is to go and buy the batting that you put in between quilts. And you can separate the sheets in half and make them thinner, and then cushion the flowers between the flowers, each flower from one another, and from the flowers and the leaves. And so when you're driving over our rough interstates or local roads, you can avoid some of the friction damage. And again, the awards references, if you want to go to the American Orchid Society judging sites, you can show your plants off that way and possibly get a national award. So that kind of gives you a good idea about how to show off your orchids. One last comment about going to Orchid Society meetings is they have great food usually. So orchid growers tend to, you know, it's a close choice between growing orchids and eating food, good food. So keep that in mind.
Like any of the rest of us, you might get bitten by the orchid bug and end up with more orchids than you ever thought you might have. What do you do with that? The orchid frenzy is very, very common. We can both attest to the fact that one orchid is generally the beginning of a passion. Well, you can share them with your friends. Obviously, we're going to show you a little bit later here about how to divide them and do that. You can loan them to your friends. But what happens when your kitchen sink and your windowsills and your spare bedroom and all those places are full? You have a couple of options. One of them is to board them at a nursery or a local place nearby. That means you're basically paying rent to have them taken care of in the winter mostly, when you can grow them easily on your own in the summer. You can modify your basement, as this is shown in this slide, where you actually add special lighting to be able to grow them indoors. If you do that, you'll need to modify your growing conditions inside. There are lots of different kinds of lighting, and we're really not going to get into the details on that, but we can have that resource if you like it in the future. You can convert a spare bedroom to an orchid room. You'll need to modify the humidity in your house to be able to accommodate that. As we spoke about last time, about air circulation and humidity, all those things you need to be aware of can affect the walls in your house. So That may not be your perfect solution, but it is one option. And lastly, when might it be a time to build a greenhouse? Your collection is expanded to your whole house, and you've exhausted all your other options.
Husband and wife. Hinting at problems.
Basically, they're everywhere. That might be a time to consider a greenhouse. There are some that are add-ons to the side of your house, or some that are alone. Lots of different things going on nowadays with technology make for automated greenhouses. Have things that are basically on temperature controls, and your life isn't tethered as heavily to your greenhouse as it might have been probably 20 years ago. There's a lot of options. There's environmental conditions and expense and all those other things that you need to take into effect. And hopefully you will be able to enjoy your orchids beyond your windowsill. At this point now, we're going to go into our demonstration about how to divide your orchid. And herein comes the reference to the different parts that we spoke about at the beginning of the presentation.
There's one that needs to be repotted. It won't even stand up. I brought in several that, for different reasons, need to be repotted. This plant, you can see, has active roots coming from the bottom of the new growth. So that's an ideal time to repot any orchid. This would be in the Cattleya group. And the Cattleyas are kind of funny in that some of them, on a new growth just starting, they'll start new roots. Some of them, the new growth is nearly fully grown and they'll start new roots. And some of them will actually develop the entire new growth, harden off, flower, and then start new roots. You always want to do them when you have new roots coming at the bottom of the newest growth, whatever stage it's in. If you have ones that have 2 leaves on a growth, those are called bifoliate Cattleyas. Definitely want to do those when you have new roots coming at the bottom of the new growth. They're very sensitive to root damage, and you can lose the plant very quickly if you repot it at the wrong time. The reason why you do it when you have new roots is you almost cannot avoid damaging old roots when you repot. It's just going to happen. You're going to damage some of the roots. So if you have new roots coming, they can replace the ones that you might damage. Now this one has new roots coming at the base of the growth. So it's an ideal time to repot. But you could look at it and say, well, I had to wait another year on that. There's a little space there. And that's a valid consideration. But I'm looking on the back of my tag, and it said the last time I repotted this was in 2007. So it's 3 years. The potting mix is probably going to start breaking down rapidly. If, like about the time it's going to flower, the next time it's going to break down, and then the whole plant will crash. So I would repot this anyways, even though I could possibly keep it in the same size pot. So those are the kind of considerations you keep in mind when you're going to divide or repot your plant. And we're referring to particularly to the sympodial orchids, where the stems are connected by a rhizome. Now here's a Cattleya that's in ideal time to repot. It's got new growth. I'll tip it here, and you can see that it's actually growing in 2 directions. I have a young pseudobulb here, mature. I have one over here. I have a new growth right here. So it's actually growing in 3 directions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sterile tool, and we'll talk about that real quick. We have drop tools. We have just a kitchen knife, which is particularly handy if you're going to be taking a plant out of a clay pot, because the roots tend to cling to the clay pot. And you can put it down against the wall of the pot and go around the pot and loosen the roots, because they tend to cling. And just a pair of stainless steel scissors, because sometimes if the material is thin that you're going to be cutting off, regular clippers won't cut it. They'll bind up. And then a pair of of loppers, or clippers, whatever you want to call them. Pruners, that's the word. So we'll take the labels out of the pot, make sure there's no rhizome clips. Do you remember what those are? They bend over the edge of the pot, and then they have a piece that goes across the rhizome and holds the rhizome down. And let's see, we go this way. So we can either do this after we take it out of the pot or before. Tools are sterilized. Cheryl's reminding me. Show the torch. Yeah.
Do we get to do
And
Okay.
don't melt the monitor. Whatever.
No. This is a good way to sterilize your tools.
Plant. There's also Russ's method of
Trisodium phosphate. Just go to your paint store, get trisodium phosphate, put warm water in your container, and add as much trisodium phosphate until you can't dissolve anymore. That's called a supersaturated solution. When it cools down, you'll actually get some condensing on the bottom of your container. And then you only have to soak your tool in that for about, 3 minutes or less. So I've already done that with the loppers. And if we can go overhead again, I'll show you it. There we go. Let's turn it that way. Okay, you want to always have at least 3 and preferably 4 pseudobulbs stems to a piece. So because this has 2 growths, I can't divide that down further. So I'm going to cut the rhizome right in here. And you can do this either while it's still in the pot, or you can do it after you've taken it out of the pot. Now this other piece right here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I can do with this is I can actually, I get in there, I can cut the rhizome right in here. So now I've got 2 front, what they call a front division or a front lead, and that's the best kind because they're going to start actively growing right away. Take our wire off here so we can, Okay, and we aren't going to actually repot the plant. We're just showing you how to divide it. So now I'll have some back bulbs. And they have dormant eyes like Cheryl showed you. It has roots. And then as you see, the plant will just fall apart once you knock the potting medium off. And again, I won't bother to do that. But it'll fall into 3 pieces. The front leads you can share with your, keep one and share one with a friend. The back bulbs keep them a little bit on the dry side, and hopefully one of those dormant eyes that Cheryl talked about will start to grow, and you'll get another piece of the plant. So that gives you an idea of how to divide your plant. Knock the old stuff off as much as you can. Avoid damaging the old roots as much as possible, and then when you put it in the new pot, the rhizome, you want to keep that rhizome horizontal as much as possible and slightly below the rim of the pot so that when you put your potting mix in and you water it, you aren't going to wash out your potting mix. If you put it too high up with this being the front of the plant, it'll grow up out of the pot and you'll have a lot of aerial roots. If you put it this way down below, then it's possible that you'll rot those dormant eyes or the new growth. So keep it horizontal.
Remember
to clip, if you have a rhizome clip, to clip your plant so the roots don't move and break off.
Right, and to tie it to a stake too, and that also, if you can secure it 2 ways, that's the best way to do that.
When you're dividing a plant?
Well, it depends on the size of the plant. It's most plants that you would buy in the store after you had it a year and decide you need to repot it probably should just go in a bigger pot. After you get A plant that has 8 stems, even if it's growing in just one direction, then you can cut it in half and see if the dormant eyes on the back half will grow.
We do have a few questions. One is unrelated to dividing, but it has to do with flowers. Where do you cut the stem back after all the flowers have fallen off?
Assuming we're referring to Phalaenopsis, which is what most people grow, follow the stem all the way back to the base. If you've had a full year and then some of growth, then you can cut it back at the very base of the stem. Or as Russ mentioned before, you can follow it back to a branching node, cut it right above that portion. It doesn't show on this plant, but it would be something like this, where you could find one of their little stem bracts or miniature leaves, and you'd cut it above that so that you have a chance.
That's what
Right here. So you have a second branching. If the stem itself has browned and yellowed, then you won't have a chance for any of that branching, and you'd cut it back at the base.
What do you do if you've got an orchid that has never bloomed?
Really good question. Some of the things you need to at least attempt to address is those cultural conditions that you might not have been giving it as an ideal situation. If it's a cattleya or a bright light plant, try giving it more light. If you haven't been fertilizing it regularly, try giving it more food. Some of the other things you can do is move it around in your house and try different lighting conditions. And
temperature drop at night.
Right.
Times will stimulate them to flower.
So try those first, and then go consult your local orchid, and your local societies can help you.
In the webinar today, you've talked about many different chemicals that can be used for different situations. What if somebody doesn't want to use some of those chemicals? What are other options that exist?
There are some more organic methods of pest control. A lot of them are labor intensive. What I like to recommend is isopropyl alcohol. Usually it's about a 30% mixture. And basically you're using Q-tips or cotton squares, and you're using your eyes and your hands as opposed to the chemicals themselves. So you're down in the small corners and cracks and crevices of the plant. And if you do this method, you actually need to go back routinely once a week or so in order to break the life cycle of the individuals that you don't see. So you'll have to be more diligent about maintenance when you go that way.
Yeah, because you can't see the eggs that they may have laid, and they're going to hatch out and be active. So that's why you have to keep going back and make sure that you get them all over a period of time.
There's dormant horticultural oils and safer soap and some other organic materials that can be used to suffocate the insects, as opposed to the chemicals, which can often result in a resistance buildup, or basically the insects are no longer affected by it.
For anyone attending the webinar, feel free to chat other questions, but is there any other information that you'd like to present?
Well, I know we would like to continue this process if the audience thinks it's worthwhile, and we would like to know what you would like us to cover in future presentations. So there's a slide in the presentation that has our email addresses and contact information. Let us know if you want this to continue, and if so, what topics would you like us to cover about growing orchids in your home, or are there related hobbies, or where can you go to see orchids in botanical gardens and that sort of thing? We can do some future programs as well.
I'm getting lots of responses saying, yes, 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 wonderful. So I think that people want to have things continue. What I'm chatting right now, and I'll go ahead and say it online as well, if you have specific topics or questions, we need to know what to present. So go ahead and email those to us, and that'll give us future topics for conversation.
Great, and we appreciate your being with us, because it's a great hobby. They're wonderful plants. There's almost no end to the variety of aspects to the hobby, as well as to the plants you can grow.
As you can tell, orchids are something that are a passion for the Wheeler Orchid Collection. The Wheeler Orchid Collection is the largest collection of orchids at any university anywhere. If you want to find a larger collection, you have to actually go to a botanical society or a private collection. And we do many things at the Wheeler Orchid Collection. Obviously, we keep the plants, so there's a curation aspect. There's also an education aspect, which is exactly what these webinars have been about. We are looking for a new home for the Wheeler Orchid Collection. We've had it since 1971. And currently we're trying to expand the facility with a 1,000-foot expansion, which is going to total around $300,000. We want a conservatory aspect in addition to a growing aspect to complement the education that we do. If you would be so inclined, we would love to see you donate 1 square foot of that new facility, $300, and that can be through a gift or a pledge. And on the screen there, you see the account number. And if you have any questions about how you can help the orchids, and hopefully we've been a great, valuable asset to you, you can contact any of us, but my contact information is up there. Like we said, the facility has been there since 1971. That's how long we've had the collection, and it's time for it to get repotted, in a sense, with a new facility, because we've got many plants, and we are a species bank in addition, so we regularly collect different orchids that have been illegally smuggled into the United States, so we just need more room and a better facility. Russ and Cheryl, any other final thoughts, any questions that maybe haven't been posed yet that you typically get asked by people?
I just want to show you one plant that's kind of fun that I brought. It's a terrestrial tropical orchid, and my little girls call it the Santa Claus orchid because of all the fuzziness on the flowers. But it's really easy to grow, although people claim they have difficulty. You just grow it like a house plant, and in the fall it turns yellow and brown. You cut the leaves off, and you don't water it until next spring. It's really easy to do. So there's some really unusual orchids you can grow that are not all that difficult to maintain. Just one example of the wide variety of orchids that you all can enjoy.
On behalf of Russ and Cheryl, I want to thank you for joining in today's webinar. And Russ and Cheryl, thank you. I know that you've put a lot of time into this. I know that you care about the collection and the topic. And from the responses that I'm getting, people have really been helped with this. So we want to thank you for your time as well. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you have specific topics that you'd like to see them cover in the future, email any of us. Later on today, because of your registration information, I'll be emailing you some of the different resources as well as a recorded clip of today. So you can feel free to respond and share that link to other people as well. So on behalf of Ball State, the Wheeler Orchid Collection, Russ and Cheryl, thank you, and I hope you have a good day.